The LGBTQ movement has existed for many years, and the road to recognize LGBTQ plus people as valid has been a long and hard one. What started with riots in LA and New York has blossomed into an incredible community. But what did the community have to go through to get here, and what does it still have to go through today?
Hello, my name is Jamie Velasquez, and I'll be talking specifically about the discrimination in the history of the LGBTQ community. While some may argue that the LGBTQ community is a minority group that faces little to no discrimination, that is a false statement. Back in 1924, one of the first allies of the community, Henry Gerber, began writing about how being gay was actually quite normal and not something to be ashamed of. Later on, he was imprisoned and eventually gave up on his dream of equality. Later on, in 1950, being gay was labeled as a mental illness and was even considered a threat to national security by the president. It wasn't until 1973 until mental health professionals stopped referring homosexuality as a mental illness. However, before that, in 1952, it got so far that being gay was labeled as a sociopathic personality disorder. And in 1953, President Eisenhower went as far as to ban gay people from workplaces. A lot of cops eventually began targeting and harassing people of the LGBTQ community, specifically trans women. This would lead to things such as the Cooper Donuts riot and the riot in Compton's cafeteria, and even the famous Stonewall riots that happened in New York. These riots were all led by trans women who were revolting against cops that were targeting and harassing them just for their identity. Further down the timeline in 1977, Harvey Milk, one of our first openly gay politicians in California, got assassinated after turning down Prop 6, which would have banned gay teachers. A bit later on in the 1980s, when the AIDS crisis was happening, it was formerly known as the gay-related immune deficiency before people realized that it could also affect heterosexuals. It's also important to note that nothing was done about the AIDS pandemic until later on when George Bush was president, and it was figured out that it could also affect straight people. Going into the 90s, it didn't improve so much. Don't Ask, Don't Tell was passed, which meant that any queer person had to keep their identity a secret. And then, the Defense of Marriage Act was passed, which denied same-sex couples the benefits and recognition that opposite-sex couples would get. And while some may believe that this was just something that would happen in the 1900s, it still leaked into the 2000s as well. As in 2003, Texas tried making gay relations illegal, and in 2008, our own state of California, which is considered one of the most open and safe places for the LGBTQ community, tried passing Prop 8, which would have made gay marriage illegal. Fortunately, though, this was deemed unconstitutional and was not passed, and even to this day, around 64 countries criminalize being queer, some even having the death penalty as a punishment for this. Thankfully, though, the queer community got a big win when in 2015, states could no longer ban same-sex marriage within the United States. So even though it's been a long and hard journey, we've definitely improved. And while it may seem small in the bigger picture, it's one step closer to people freely identifying as who they are, not having to hide in fear.
LGBT history of the riots. Everyone talks about Stonewall, but there were a lot of different people involved before and after. Let's go back to 1924, where a man named Henry Gilbert, a scientist that traveled to Germany and saw all these open gay men. He was amazed and inspired, so he wrote a book about how being gay was normal. Henry took his book to the States, where he started the first known gay organization, but it was only for white gay men. Later, he was imprisoned and gave up on his dreams of gay rights. Later on, Harry Hay, in 2002, Harry Hay was a committed activist who co-founded the Matching Society, the first enduring gay rights organization in 1950. Another gay activist group was called the Daughters of Atlas, founded in 1955 in San Francisco. It was a lesbian right group that welcomed all the gays, including gay men. They began as a private social club and faced odds. The Daughters of Billets were subjected to not just the surveillance of local police, but also the CIA and FBI. Finally, Stonewall. In the beginning of Stonewall was started by a trans woman in a place called Black Cat, which was a donut shop. Later on, it was a popular gay bar in New York City. Homosexuality was considered a criminal offense and took over a decade before same-sex relationships were legalized in 1980.
Hello, My name is Joey Escamilla, and I will be talking about the LGBTQ movement after 2015. On June 26, 2015, the Supreme Court passed same-sex marriage and recognized same-sex marriage on a federal level. This was a huge win for the LGBTQ community, but many people forget that there is more to fight for, and that winning marriage was not the end goal for the movement. There have been laws banning gender transition care for minors enacted in 20 states in the past year or so. Some states focus only on surgical procedures, but others will also ban things like puberty blockers and hormones or hormone replacement therapy, otherwise known as HRT. Supporters of these laws claim that minors are not mature enough to make these decisions and that they can be harmful. But it is very rare for a transgender person under the age of 18 to be approved for gender-affirming surgeries. So the ones that are approved are most likely doing really bad mentally and need the surgery to prevent things like self-harm and suicide. Medical professionals have evidence that shows that gender-affirming treatment leads to better mental health, and denying someone of this care is detrimental. But these rules aren't only geared towards minors. Some states included legislations to restrict transgender adults from seeking treatments. For example, laws in Florida and Missouri prevent Medicaid from covering surgeries and other treatments. Some states have also written consequences for doctors and consider it unprofessional conduct to help minors transition. Indiana and Mississippi both have legal consequences for doctors and any other who aid and abet in getting people access to gender-affirming care. This is so broad that it could include people like parents or any other allies. Florida becomes one of the 5 states that makes providing care a felony, which can result in up to 5 years in prison. A law in Tennessee prevents anyone from changing the sex on their official documents, which causes higher levels of anxiety and depression in transgender people. At least 21 states have banned trans women and girls from playing sports on female teams. Some states require that parents be notified when their child requests to be called by a name or pronouns that don't match their sex assigned at birth. This could be harmful to trans youth that might not come from accepting homes or aren't ready to come out to their families yet. Winning same-sex marriage was an incredible moment for the community, but that was never the end goal. The amount of states passing anti-trans legislature is alarming and extremely dangerous, and it's important to remember that not every member of the LGBTQ community is safe under law, and the fighting cannot stop until that is true.
In media shows like Pose have been acknowledged for its realistic perspective of the LGBTQ characters, particularly transgender women of color. Another great example is also Schitt's Creek, had also received a lot of acknowledge for its depiction of the pansexual character, David Rose, who is portrayed by Dan LaVey. Another in film, Call Me By Your Name and Moonlight have been praised for their exploitation of queer experiences. Also, in the music industry, artists like Janelle Monáe, Hayley Kiyoko are recognized for their contributions in LGBTQ representation through their music and public personas like through social media, etc. But while these examples represent progress, there is an ongoing need for more diverse and authentic portrayals of queer identities in the media, so forth.
This is Mr. Marchant. We brought him in for our interview because he is a queer man that works at our school. Thank you for joining us today and letting us interview you.
Thank you for having me.
So our first question is, do you remember any movements about marriage equality?
Marriage equality was initially passed while I was a teenager at the time, not too far from your own age. In some states, if I recall. At the time, I was not terribly active as an activist, but I do remember the propositions going through in California and being slightly surprised and pleasantly surprised when they passed.
Okay. Just as a small follow-up question to that, did you have anyone else as a small community while you were a teenager around our age?
So, I grew up in Claremont, which likes to be a very supportive liberal community, and while it has some problems with some of its implementation as a city, it meant that I never felt the need to have a specific support group due to just the surrounding community and my family being generally supportive.
That's good then. As you grew up, did you end up doing anything to being included in like activist movements, or were you
Most of
like
my
more on the
work,
sidelines?
most of the work I have done has largely been now that in my professional career, trying to be here for students and provide spaces and someone they can talk to who they know is supportive and visibly supportive.
Did you like have to? I don't know how to phrase this,
I
but like,
have not spent time in protests or
yeah,
similar.
it's like closer to the question that I was trying to get at. Like any,
No, I have not participated in marches, protests, or similar.
okay.
I've tried to be somewhat mindful with my consumer habits, but that has been a minor impact compared to people who go out on the front lines like that.
Yeah, yeah, okay, I can understand that. Like how I'm like, if it's not too personal to like ask, how would you like describe when you were able to like come out, or like that experience with like telling people who you were?
So I first figured it out myself around the end of middle school, but it wasn't until my junior year of high school that I actually felt ready to come out of the closet. As I said, I was in a generally supportive environment. My family had sort of like deliberately sent messages along the way to my sister and myself, like, this is fine. Gay rights are human rights. And sent those messages in a blanket sense. But I just personally didn't see a reason or feel quite ready until I was
Mm-hmm.
around 16 or so.
Like, would you say that you didn't like really feel afraid?
I did not have any specific fears. It was just something that I didn't want to deal with and didn't want to put out there until that time, until when I was like, yeah, no, I'm good now.
No, yeah, okay.
It was just hitting a point where I felt prepared to take that leap in my life and like, okay, I'm ready for the next step. There were no specific fears immediate to me.
Mm-hmm. Do you have like any like words of like advice to like younger people that might be going through the same thing that you might have gone through?
People talk a lot today about being out and proud. If that is possible for you to do safely, fantastic. I encourage you to do it. Help support each other, build your community. I recognize that it's not always safe for people to do so, depending on their home situation or the community they're surrounded with. So ultimately, I encourage you to do what you can, but to take care of yourself as much as necessary.
That's
People are there for you. As time goes on and gain independence, you can take further steps. But if you need to lay low for a while, you do what you gotta. Don't feel pressured to take a leap that you aren't prepared for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's like always your own like safety first before everything else. So thank you for joining us on our podcast and letting us interview you once again.
Once again, happy to be here.